Did you know that Joss Whedon nearly continued Buffy the Vampire Slayer in animated form? Well, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Slayer, so in honor of this momentous occasion, I am going to tell you all about this legendary unmade show in a little segment I like to call Greetings fanboys and fangirls, I'm ERod and I'm the Blockbuster Buster, and welcome to Legends of Fandom, where I talk about fanboy films and shows that were never made. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it a million times. There is no show that appeals to me more than Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In the late 90s, Joss Whedon revolutionized the way primetime fantasy shows are made, with his legendary series, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. An eclectic mixture of drama, comedy, action, and the supernatural, Buffy paved the way for the ever-dominant fantasy shows of today, as well as the growing acceptance of strong female heroes on television. Suffice it to say, when this show came to its epic conclusion in 2003, fans still wanted more. And believe it or not, Joss Whedon and his amazing writing staff had a plan in place to keep the show going without disrupting the oh-so-important continuity of the series. And they would have achieved this through Buffy Animated. This series, which was described as a more mature version of the early Spider-Man comics, would have taken place during the first season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, meaning that the whole series would have transpired while Buffy and her friends were still in high school. This was done in an attempt to make the show lighter and for it to appeal to a younger demographic. The show's development began in 2002, right as the live-action Buffy was wrapping production. Fox greenlit the series and originally intended for it to air during its Fox Kids Saturday morning lineup, in order to replace other dramatic animated hits such as X-Men and Batman the Animated Series. Jeff Loeb, who's best known nowadays as the Executive Vice President of Marvel Television, was slated to be the co-executive producer of the series, right alongside Joss. And the majority of the writers from the live-action series were due to come back as well, including Jane Espenson, Stephen S. the Knight, Drew Greenberg, Doug Petrie, and Rebecca Kirshner. It goes without saying, but this show was going to have a powerhouse of talent behind it. But then, unfortunately, things started to go wrong. As in the early 2000s, the growing dominance of channels like Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, and Cartoon Network drove Saturday morning cartoon lineups out of business. And in February 2002, Fox Kids ceased operations, meaning that Buffy Animated no longer had a home. At this point, Fox started shopping around the series to other networks, but no one would take it, as the show was deemed too adult for kids and too goofy for prime time. Wait, just because Fox lost its Saturday morning cartoon lineup, they didn't even stop to consider airing Buffy Animated in a primetime slot on their own network? Oh well. It's not like one of their primetime flagship shows is one of the longest running adult animated shows of all time. They could have just aired Buffy Animated on Sundays right after The Simpsons. It's a no-brainer. They could have even done a crossover to promote it. Buffy goes through a mystical portal, ends up in the Simpsons universe, then Lisa turns out to be a potential slayer, Mr. Burns turns out to be a vampire, which would explain why he has lived for so long. The crossover writes itself, for Pete's sake! Oh well, this is the same network that didn't know what to do with Futurama and Firefly, so I guess I shouldn't be shocked. Ultimately, Buffy Animated was dead in the water until 2004, when there was a sudden surge in popularity for adult-centric cartoons, thanks to Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, and channels like Comedy Central and Spike TV, who were picking up adult-oriented animated shows left and right. So Joss and his amazing crew were asked to continue development on Buffy Animated. And they were even commissioned to produce a 4-minute animated sample of what the show would be like. One of the few caveats instituted by the network this time around was that the original cast members had to come back and voice their characters. Thankfully, almost everyone jumped at the chance to return, including Allison Hannigan as Willow, Nicholas Brendon as Xander, Anthony Stewart Head as Giles, Charisma Carpenter as Cordelia, Michelle Trachtenberg as Dawn, Kristen Sutherland as Buffy's mom, Armin Sherman as Principal Snyder, and David Boreanaz as Angel.
Angel.
Quiet! Unfortunately, the one cast member that refused to return was the most important one of them all, Sarah Michelle Gellar as Buffy Summers. According to Gellar, Buffy was one of the most emotionally rewarding but physically exhausting experiences of her career, and it was just too soon for her to return. Plus, she didn't feel very confident in her voiceover skills at the time. While she might have been okay with doing a voice on an occasional movie or a supporting role on an animated show, she just wasn't ready at the time to take the lead role on a weekly series. Which is a damn shame because her roles in TMNT and Star Wars Rebels have proven that she has the potential to be an extraordinary voiceover actor. Nonetheless, Sarah Michelle Gellar was replaced with Giselle Lauren. Best known for voicing Stargirl in Justice League Unlimited, Giselle also voiced Buffy in the official Buffy the Vampire Slayer video game for Xbox, as well as its unofficial sequel, Chaos Bleeds. And I have to say, Giselle is really good at imitating Sarah Michelle Gellar's voice.
A surprise party. Whose idea was this? I'll kill ya. Not that I don't appreciate the thought, but who invited the vampires?
Now, the 4-minute animated sample that Fox produced in order to sell the show actually leaked online in the mid-2000s, so you can watch it on YouTube at any time. But if you want a quick rundown, here it goes. The short starts appropriately enough with Buffy slaying a vampire, who according to Giles turns out to be a follower of Morgalla, or as Buffy calls them,
And the followers of Morgan Freeman.
As per usual, these Morgan Freeman lovers want to bring about the apocalypse, which Buffy will have to prevent, if she's not too preoccupied with what to wear for an upcoming party.
Ooh, but gosh, what'll happen if you and Cordelia are wearing the same color? It'll be, you know, a thing.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess that you're making fun of us, Giles.
And right when you think we're about to cut away to a boring, mundane party scene, a huge dragon crashes through the ceiling and eats Buffy alive. But guess what? Slayer was not on the menu on this fateful evening. The only thing Buffy is serving are knuckle sandwiches, made to order. And then we cut to black. Okay, after seeing that, I need two things. Number one, I need a cigarette. And number two, I need more episodes of this freaking show. Unfortunately, while there were a few networks interested in the show, none of them were willing to pay the high price tag required per episode to produce the series. You see, while expensive animated shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender and Voltron, Legendary Defender are not unheard of, those shows are for general audiences, meaning that they can air them anywhere at any time, which means the network will get its money's worth. With Buffy Animated, the networks interested only wanted to air it in a primetime slot, which equals to a very limited time frame in which the show can be shown. Which means this would have been a huge risk for the network, and why paying such a huge price tag per episode was just not worth it. It was just a no-win scenario. And here's what Joss had to say on the matter. And I quote, "We just couldn't find a home for it. We had a great animation director, great visuals, 6 or 7 hilarious scripts from our own staff, and nobody wanted it. I was completely baffled. I felt like I was sitting there with bags of money and nobody would take them from me. It was a question of people either not wanting it or not being able to put up the money, because it was not a cheap show. One thing I was very hardline about was I didn't want people to see it if it looked like crap. I wanted it to be on the same level with Animaniacs or Batman the Animated Series. And that's a little pricier. But I just don't think it's worth doing unless it's beautiful to look at as well as fun." And thus, the show was cancelled. But strangely, that was not the end of Buffy Animated, as the legend of this unmade show spread far and wide among Buffy fans. And every now and then, you see fan art and merchandise emerge in relation to this elusive show. This cult-like fascination with this non-existent series came to a head in issue 20 of the Buffy Season 8 comic book series, in a one-shot titled "After These Messages, We'll Be Right Back," which was written by the guy that was almost the co-executive producer of Buffy Animated, Jeff Loeb. In this nostalgic issue, the modern-day canonical Buffy falls asleep after a long night of slaying, only to wake up in the world of Buffy Animated, which, may I remind you, takes place during Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 1. The comic pretty much follows the events of the animated sample that was produced by Fox, with a few added scenes, the biggest ones being a scene including Joyce and Dawn at the very beginning of the comic, and one with Angel towards the end. And there's also an added twist, as Buffy still remembers everything that happened to her during her 7 years as a Slayer in Sunnydale, which presents the following conflict. Does she use her future knowledge to change the timeline for the better, or does she keep her mouth shut and enjoy a time period when life wasn't quite as complicated? Unfortunately, before Buffy can make up her mind, she wakes up in the real world, and then the comic book ends. Now, does this comic make the events of the animated sample canon? That is debatable. I'm just glad that some of the work that went into Buffy Animated was actually used for something that was published and sold. But believe it or not, this was still not the end of Buffy Animated. Because in 2014, the cartoon Slayer was referenced one last time, in a very impressive animated short by comic book artist Stephen Byrne, who also worked on the Firefly comic with Joss Whedon. Byrne's short is basically the opening sequence for Buffy Animated, and while he used original designs for the characters to avoid copyright infringement, he still managed to sneak in a few strategic references to the unmade show, like a shrunken Buffy, which would have been the subject of an episode that was written for the show by Jane Espenson, aptly titled Teenie, and of course the dragon that Buffy fights in the animated sample, which apparently she tames in the series according to Byrne. Oh, before I forget, I should mention that this short is loaded with Easter eggs, and it is an absolute delight to watch for any true Buffy fan. So go to Stephen Byrne's YouTube channel and check it out. It is great. So that was the story of Buffy Animated, the unmade series. Would you like to see me open up another super secret case file in the future and tell you about another unmade oddity? Let me know in the comment section below, or better yet, give this video a thumbs up. The more thumbs up I get, the more inclined I will be to produce more videos like this one in the future. Now, do you know of any unmade fanboy films or shows? Let me know at erod@inbox.com so I can determine whether they are worthy of being a legend of fandom. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I'm ERod, and I'm the Blockbuster Buster.